when I was 17, 18, the teeny bop magazines were kind of like a magnet for if you walk into a grocery store and you'd see 12-year-old little girls overlooking through 16 magazine, and you'd pray that you weren't on the cover that week. Hello, I'm Butch Patrick. You may know me best as Eddie Munster, but you're watching Famous with Jacy Valeras.
Butch Patrick, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me, Jacy.
You are so welcome. You and I met briefly backstage at the Grand Ole Opry. We were there on the night that Ricky Skaggs was celebrating his birthday.
You know, it was funny. My girlfriend, I don't know if you met her or not, but she had never been to the Grand Ole Opry. And I just dropped in with a friend of mine in Nashville, a gentleman named Stephen Coleman, who's a musician, works at the Gibson Guitar Factory. So he always gets me in, and now that we know the people, but I had no idea that it was Ricky's birthday. And then number two, that we had the Bellamy brothers were there. And then we also had, I'm drawing a blank with the Eagles.
Vince
Vince Gill. Yes. Oh my God. Vince was there. I was like, oh my, I mean, for being the first time at the Grand Ole Opry, you hit a home run.
Well, I have to tell you, you were the least likely person to be backstage in my mind at the Opry. So when you came out, oh my goodness, everyone was going crazy. I mean, everybody in Nashville is used to seeing all these country stars, but you came out and everyone was lining up to get their picture with you.
You know, it's so funny. I guess it's just country music and Nashville and the 60s and the Munsters and family value situations, you know, crosses all boundaries. And I mean, I've been treated so well in Nashville. I've been to the Ryman. The people that run the Ryman want me to come back, and it's like there's so much history there. And a good friend of mine, his name is Bill Miller, who runs the Johnny Cash properties, and he was best friends with Johnny Cash when Johnny passed, and Johnny left him the executor of his estate. And Bill chose Nashville as where he should be doing Johnny Cash properties. And he moved from LA to Nashville about 15 years ago. Wow. And he's got about 9 properties there now. And so that's another reason when I go to Nashville, I see friends, you know. But he's a California boy that took to Nashville like, wow, you know, like he can't get enough of it. And he just keeps opening up. I don't know if you're familiar with the properties that he has, but he has about 9 of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's incredible. It's so funny because Nashville is almost like the new Los Angeles. I feel like everyone comes here to get a taste of all of that almost Hollywood excitement.
Well, they don't call it Nash Vegas for nothing.
Very true. Yes. Well, I want to jump in to a little bit about your career. I know you wrote an autobiography years ago, and a lot of the details of your life are out there and you do tons of interviews, but I want to talk to you about a few of those little things. So sure. Actor, writer, musician, you have done so many things in your career. I want to start at the beginning, and I'm going to start at the beginning with your name, because Butch Patrick is not your real name, and your mom had something to do with that.
Yeah. I've met a lot of Butches, and it's funny. I don't think anybody's ever really been given a Christian, the birth name of Butch. It's always been a nickname. My real name is Patrick, and my grandmother, the day of birth, saw me. I was a big baby, and she called me Butch, and it stuck. So when I started acting when I was 7, my last name at that time was Patrick Lilly, Butch being a nickname, and they just came pretty easy. Butch and Patrick, 2 first names, and there wasn't another Butch in the union at the time. And here we are at the time when I joined the union in 1963, there were 18,000 members. Today, I think there's over 500,000. And I don't think there's still another Butch in the union.
Wow, you're still holding on to it.
Yeah. So that's how they came up with my stage name.
That's incredible. And I know it was kind of a family affair because your sister opened the door for you to kind of get your foot into acting a little bit.
Yeah. People say, how did you get involved in the business? Who's in the business? And I said, my whole life and career has been sort of a happenstance, accidental, just being at the right place at the right time. But the biggest thing was, yes, they were looking at my little sister for some print modeling photos. And that day I was 7 years old. So my mom picked me up at school and we all went up there together, 2nd grade. She didn't want me, at that time. Anyway, I wound up going for the ride instead of going home. And when they were done with her, the gentleman, his name was Amos Carr, and he was the go-to photographer in Hollywood for kid actors. And he looked over and he goes, I like your Butch's look over there. You mind if I take a couple pictures of it? My mom goes, no, not at all. So he took a few pictures and he stuck one of them in his window on Hollywood Boulevard. And about a month later, a producer and a director happened to be walking by and they noticed the picture and they were looking for the youngest son of Eddie Albert and Jane Wyatt, this upcoming movie that they hadn't been able to cast yet. They sought me out, brought me up, and then my mom's friend, who wasn't yet my agent, Mary Grady, arranged a meeting, and I went up and I got the part. I became her client. She was the first child actor agency exclusively. She had worked for a normal agency and she branched off to specialize in kids. Her son was Don Grady, who was Robbie and My Three Sons, was her first client. And then after that, I was her second client. And I was right at the ground floor with her agency and my career. And I wasn't intimidated by the process, and I got along well with adults. And I looked younger than I was, and I was mentally older. I handled dialogue better than a normal 7-year-old, so they liked it. I looked 5, but I acted like I was 12, and everything else fell into place.
What is your earliest memory of being on a set or in front of a camera?
Well, that particular movie, the other kid, my older brother, was kind of picking on me a lot, and he kind of shoved me. We were running around like kids will do, and he shoved me, and I fell forward and I knocked my tooth out. And I stood up and I said, "That's it, I quit." And it was like, they go, "What?" I go, "I don't want to do this anymore. I quit." And I just was, "Mom, let's go home." Not understanding the ramifications that you just can't quit when you're in the middle of a movie. But to me, it was like, I don't want to do this anymore. So they took Donnie Carter over to that corner, and they took me out to get ice cream. And by the time I came back, they told Donnie if he lays one more hand on me, they're going to fire him. And the rest was fine. But that was my first real big memory. Was I couldn't understand why I couldn't quit and go home if I wanted to. But it was good. I enjoyed the process. Eddie Albert was wonderful. Jane Wyatt, I'd watched her on on Father Knows Best. And Soupy Sales was the comic relief cop. But speaking of Nashville, Brenda Lee played my older sister at 15 years old.
I did not know that. That's incredible.
Yeah. It's a great little movie. It's called The Two Little Bears. Miss Hathaway from the Beverly Hillbillies played my teacher, Nancy Culp. So you got Nancy Culp and you got Eddie Albert, and you got Soupy Sales. It's a good little cast. Jane Wyatt and Eddie Albert.
What do you think the biggest difference was about the time in Hollywood when you became famous as a child versus a child becoming famous now in Hollywood?
Well, the biggest difference isn't really with Hollywood. Hollywood is just a reflection of society and how people view life. I mean, you can write a script and you can make it a period piece from the 30s and 40s, but they don't transfer like it's really done in the 30s and 40s. I mean, you just can't remake Casablanca. It just doesn't work. And the key to that is, it's like they say to the Munsters, what do you attribute the longevity of it to? And I go, well, number one, the 60s as a decade was a very powerful 10-year period. And I worked from 60 to 74. Music, movies, television, black and white TV, to color TV. There was a lot of transitional stuff going on. Hollywood used to be the only place you could be to make movies, and now you can make them anywhere in the country. So you had a whole different mindset of what it was like to work in the studio process. The actual reading a script, technology is different, but you still have to know your dialogue, hit your mark. There's certain criteria that hasn't changed at all, even though the technology has. But the biggest difference has been the money factor. It's like the money has gotten so crazy that a lot of people are getting into it for the wrong reasons, where it used to be just for the love of the art. And now you have, if you're a kid, a lot of times you may have a mother or a father pushing someone into the movie business because they have their own little agenda. And when I used to teach how to get into show business the right way, one of the things I would say at the end of the seminars were, to the adults, I would say, be prepared, because you think it's all going to be great and wonderful if one of the kids catches on to a series or a movie. But remember, the home unit will be disrupted and siblings will get jealous. And one of you is going to have to take them to work. And there's a lot of, you may look at this as a good thing, but there's a lot of strings attached to it. So be prepared for that. And then I tell the kid, I says, the chances are pretty slim, but if you really, really want to be in the business, you might consider one of those names at the end of the movie that roll continuously for 12 minutes, because they're all working at the studio too. And those were my friends behind the scenes. So in case the acting thing don't work out, you may want to say, hey, maybe I'll just be a transportation captain, or maybe I'll be a location scout, or maybe I'll get into makeup. And that way you're still working in the industry you love, but the chances are much greater that you'll have a better run at that goal as opposed to being a movie star.
What a great answer. You, of course, became super famous when you landed your role on the Munsters. And one thing I find so interesting about you is you seem to still really embrace the fact that you were Eddie Munster, whereas a lot of actors, as they age and get older, they kind of like push that to the background, but you embrace it. Why do you think that is?
Well, it's easy to do for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's amazing how important and how many people have taken that show and made it a part of their childhood and their family memories. And really, people with the book that I wrote, Munster Memories, wrote itself from me just sharing stories of how much people adored that show, whether it was with their favorite grandparents that's no longer with us, or a favorite uncle, the family values, or whether they got into cars, or they built their first Halloween models. There's a lot of reasons why people have such a fond memory and a kinship to it. But literally, it was the TV guide back in the 60s before cable and streaming and everything. There were 3 channels, and the evening was usually taken up by the television set for entertainment. Weekends might be for movies, but during the week, people didn't really go out. They kind of hovered around the TV set, and you became part of their existence, not part of their household. So for me to sit at a table and simply share and be polite and share a memory with people, a positive energy and a reflection, and I always try to reach out and turn it around on them and ask their, I've lived all over the country. I've lived in small towns and big towns. My dad was a ball player. I had muscle cars. So we try to find something out of the Munster region to communicate with them a little bit. But the bottom line is, for a few minutes of your time and you sit and chat with them, it's positive energy, ebb and flow back and forth. And it means a lot to them. And when you're constantly getting positive feedback, it's very easy to do.
Is there something about that experience? I mean, like you said, you have all these people coming up to you and asking you questions about it. Is there something that people don't ask you that you think about and you wonder why, or maybe you have a great memory that people don't always come up and ask you about?
No, they're pretty occasionally, but no, I've pretty much been asked everything. The biggest thing is, a lot of people approach the table or the interaction, and they don't want to say something off color, or they don't want to embarrass themselves, or they don't want to embarrass me. So a lot of the time they're standoffish. So for me, I take it upon myself when they reach out to try to put them at ease by asking something about them. Always, their name is the most important name. Let's turn around. How do you spell that? Oh, the kids are with them, or the family unit. You just try to get them to engage and relax. And then once you crack the ice, then you may have to shoo them away after 5 or 10 minutes, but the bottom line is, it's an easy interaction. I'm so blessed to be part of something that meant so much to so many people, that all I really have to do is be polite and enjoy the moment and let them walk away happy. And how many people can say that? You can put some. Real quickly, I'll do a thing real quickly. I did a thing in Jacy where I used to live with my grandmother before I went to the Munsters. The town contacted me a few years ago to have me come back for a special event. I did, and I brought my Munster car, and they had this big car show. And at the end of the weekend, the woman that brought me in sent me an email. And she goes, "What is it like to be a person who brings a smile to everybody's face in the room?" She goes, "I can't imagine what that must feel like." And it was like, wow, I've never really thought about it that way, but that's literally how people perceive it. That how lucky is that all you've got to do is suit up and show up and be polite, and everybody smiles, and you get that feedback of positive energy.
Wow, what a beautiful life you've had. How incredible.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it. Yeah, and that was where I used to live as a kid, and I lived there when I was in the 5th grade with my grandmother, and then in the 8th grade after the Munsters, she moved from that small town to Macon, Missouri, and I lived with her again in the 8th grade. So I had a little bit of a balance of Hollywood and LA, big city, little small town, 8th grade, 5th grade. Plus, I love driving cross country. So I'm doing a thing this year with drive-in movie owners all over the country. So I really appreciate the ground game and Americana, which lends to the nostalgia of the 60s and just how lucky I was to have this little 14-year window. And being born in 53, I got enough of the 50s. I remember the Finns, and my dad was into cars, and Elvis, and I couldn't have asked for a better window of existence to the 2/3 of the 50s and until now.
When you were a kid and you started getting recognized as this child star on the Munsters, do you remember a moment that you realized, I think I'm famous?
Well, I mean, I knew there was a fame factor involved. I never really was comfortable with that. I really, really would have preferred to have done my job and never have been famous, but still had the benefits of doing the work. It would be great to where, you could sort of like walk out of the studio. One of the good things about the Munsters is a lot of people won't recognize you because you take the makeup off and you can pretty much walk around. I did a lot of other work, but because the Munsters was the most visible, people recognize my voice and they'll say, I was in the other room the other day and I heard this voice on Gunsmoke, or I heard this voice on Adam 12, and I come running around the corner and it's you. So I had this identifiable voice, which kind of gave me away sometimes. But when I guess the first time I noticed I was famous was when they would invite you to parades or they would invite you to go do personal appearances. Nothing like today, but still you would be asked to come on as a special guest and people would, basically want your autograph and pose for photos and this and that. So I guess I picked up on that back. And then it got really good when I did Lidsville when I was 17, 18, the teeny bop magazines were kind of like a magnet for if you walk into a grocery store and you'd see 12-year-old little girls overlooking through 16 magazine and you'd pray that you weren't on the cover that week.
That's great. Speaking of that, I want to talk about some of the really incredible people you've worked with. I know Charles Nelson Riley was a huge influence on you. As someone who watched like the Match Game and saw this person just kind of sitting there acting a little, silly the way he did, what is something that the general public doesn't know about a guy like that?
Well, he was a big crybaby about the makeup. And I told him, I said, I did this for 2 years. You can do it for 11 weeks, put on your big boy panties, but Charles, I had no idea how big of a star he was. I really wasn't watching a lot of the shows that he was on. And then a huge talent, very funny guy. I was more impressed with Billy Hayes, who played Weenie Genie, and Sharon Baird, who played Raunchy Rabbit, was a Mouseketeer. But I knew a lot of the little people because in Hollywood, they won't use a kid to stand in for another kid. They always use back in the day, a dwarf or a midget, but today a little person. So I knew a lot of the people in the hats from them being stand-ins. So I was amongst friends. And then Sid and Marty Krofft, I became good friends with them right off the bat. So Charles was, and I, we got along fine. I mean, I think he had a crush on me or something like that going on this is way back in the early 70s, but it was kind of like kept under wraps, sexual preference. But he never bothered me to the point where it became a problem. It was more of a funny little, he'd sneak up behind me and grab me and kiss me. I love you. I don't care who knows it. And I'd give him an elbow and he'd go running the other way. And it was this ongoing humor. But the Match Game and CNR, I'm hoodoo. Exactly. It was 11 weeks. I didn't even really want to do the series. I actually had turned it down a couple of times. And my friends, the Cowsills, who I was going to high school with at the time, told me, you never turn down work, but never turn down work. So I wound up doing it.
You also had the chance to work with Judy Garland.
Yeah.
What is your memory of working with her?
That particular movie, I had more of a memory of Burt Lancaster because I saw him more often. But I knew that, obviously The Wizard of Oz was my favorite movie as a kid. And, I wasn't really aware of her issues and stuff. I just knew she was a huge major star. But Burt Lancaster was my guy. He was like, he was a man's man type of thing and super nice guy. And that was another movie that was done with special needs children, all about, kids that were like institutionalized and stuff. That was good. I did Wayne Newton's only movie. Worked with Wayne and Joe Van Fleet and Keenan Wynn and Mickey Rooney and Sal Mineo for a little small movie called 80 Steps to Jonah. It had a heck of a lineup.
No kidding. Seriously. I know you also work with Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, right. That was good. Even that was like my favorite Western at the time. So I did, I could ride a horse. So in the early 60s, I did a couple of Bonanzas, a couple of Gunsmokes. I did A Year of the Real McCoys, where I rode a pony everywhere. And then the Rawhide, the Death Valley Days, the Daniel Boone. For a city kid, I did about 7 Westerns. But I always loved Westerns because you got to wear boots to get dirty, and you're outside, and you get to meet Clint Eastwood.
Amazing. I know that you also have said on many occasions that you didn't keep in touch with your Munsters co-stars right after the filming ended,
Yeah.
but then you kind of reconnected with them later in life. I am such a huge Yvonne De Carlo fan. I read her book when I was younger. What are some memories later in life that you can share about knowing her?
There's a couple of things about the Munsters that people may or may not be aware of. Number one, that she wasn't the first choice. There was a pilot made with a different Eddie and a different mom named Phoebe with Joan Marshall and Happy Durman. The network saw the pilot. They greenlighted the show, but they wanted to adjust the mom and the kid. So then I was living in Illinois at the time, as I stated earlier, and Mary got them to fly me out because she approached them and they go, we've looked at every kid in Hollywood. And she goes, well, there's your problem. He's not in Hollywood. He's in Geneseo, Illinois. And she showed him some of the real McCoy footage. They agreed to fly me out. And then they said, don't go home, make arrangements to report to work. So that was kind of a weird last minute casting call situation where I went directly into makeup for a screen test without actually even reading for it. And Yvonne De Carlo was there. She, in my opinion, was the glue that brought that show into the stratosphere because number one, she had star power. She was a very big name, beautiful one. But number two, she was the strength of old Hollywood versus the TV actors of Al Lewis and Fred Gwynne from Car 54, Where Are You, which were the TV comics. But she ran the household. The house was run. She was the matriarch of the house. She kept everybody in check. And she did it very, very well against these two guys that were comedy legends. And she held her own in comedy, and she was, to me, she was a key role player. They couldn't have asked for a better person. To answer the question about staying in touch, after in Hollywood, a lot of people think that you just remain friends. Now, as adults, you may remain friends, but as a kid, you go back to school, they go back to New York, the adults go back to the real world. You're a 12-year-old kid. You have nothing in common other than that show. So obviously, you're not going to be hanging out with them. But what happened was in the late, it was about 1980, I think it was, or 81, when they did the Munsters Revenge, which was a remake. Obviously, Eddie was cast as a teenager, and I was at that time I was almost 30. But Fred and Al happened to be in front of a friend of mine's business in Culver City shooting, and he called me up. He goes, "What, you do know they're doing a Munsters movie across the street from my business?" And I go, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "No, if they were doing a Munsters movie, I would know about it." Well, apparently they didn't. I missed the memo. And I drove down there, and there's Fred and there's Al right in the director's chair. And I walked right up to him, and I said, "Hey, you guys." And Fred, with his eyes closed, said, "Hello, Butch." And Al goes, Fred, it's Butch, it's Butch. And that's how we reconnected. And from that moment on, Al and I started hanging out. Fred was, as much as we were friends, he distanced himself from Munster-related stuff. But he did that movie because they offered him a lot of money. He asked for a lot of money. He thought they would say no. They accepted his role. They accepted his offer. And then he had to do the movie because I guess he asked for $1 million or something, and they gave it to him. And that's basically how it started off. And then from that point on, me and Al started working with Pat Priest. And then after that, Yvonne De Carlo was on the Vicki Lawrence show, and Vicki Lawrence wanted me to be a surprise guest for her. And I came walking out of the audience to reconnect, and that's how I met Yvonne. And then I started visiting her. She was living up in Central California in a town called Napoma. She was kind of somewhat of a recluse, but not bad. She just was up there with her doggies and lived on a golf course, and we started communicating. And then a huge fan in Hollywood, Kevin Burns, who was Prometheus Productions and Van Ness Films and a huge powerhouse in Hollywood, took it upon himself to start going up and visiting her because I wasn't living there anymore, and he would bring her movies to watch and whatever she would need. And he took care of her to the point where when she got older and sick, he got her into the old actors home where they took very good care of her for her final years. But he kind of carried the heavy load. I introduced him. I went up for that meeting. And then after that, he sort of took over the ball, but we still communicated by phone a lot.
It's so incredible to learn that kind of stuff. You hope that that's what's going on behind the scenes years later, but it's so nice to get confirmation of it.
Yeah, she was funny. We'd go out and she would call me her TV baby. This is my TV baby. And she was wonderful. She was such a huge star and literally lived the glamorous. I mean, there's back in the day there's the Sophia Lorens and the Ava Gardners and the Lana Turners and Yvonne De Carlos. I mean, she was right there with them.
Yeah. When you look back over your career, what would you say is your most proud moment, or what is the thing you did that you're the most proud of?
Well, there's a couple, but I'll tell you the one that I just did a happy birthday shout out yesterday to Mickey Dolenz. He's turning 80. And when I was a kid, I didn't want anybody to know I was an actor. I just didn't watch the shows. I didn't tell anybody about it. I just wanted to go to work, collect a paycheck, save it for my race car. That was my whole idea. I really felt uncomfortable in my own skin about acting. I thought it was kind of like I was getting way too much money for doing something that really wasn't very manly. I just wasn't comfortable with it. But when I went up and I got the Monkees Christmas show offered to me and I won out and I got that, I was in the 8th grade and I was in a school of about 3,500 people, junior high school. Every person in that school knew I was going to be on the Monkees because I was so happy about that because they were huge. The Monkees were like the biggest. They were bigger than the Beatles at that time. And so I was very, very happy. I did it. The Christmas show to boot came out very well. Really good episode. That's number one. Number two, I worked on a feature called The Phantom Toll Booth, which was a very famous book by Chuck. The movie was by Chuck Jones. Norman Juster wrote the book, and this was a chance for me to work with all the voiceover people. And Chuck Jones is the animator from the Roadrunner, and back to the Warner Brothers with Merry Melodies. He was like one of the key big players in Hollywood for animation. So this book, I got to do a couple of years of work with voiceover people. So here I am working with Mel Blanc and June Foray and Dawes Butler and all the Hans Conried and all the A-listers that were the voices of my favorite cartoons as a kid. I'm now working with them as an equal. So that was a big one for me, was the Phantom Toll Booth. And then probably those are the two that come to mind, although I did a lot of guest starring roles that and it's funny, a friend of mine is now handling some stuff for the Happy Days people. And Ron Howard, I had forgotten that I was like his best buddy on this a short-lived series called The Smith Family. And he was the oldest son, and Henry Fonda was the dad. And I'm looking up YouTube channels of me and Ronnie Howard doing scenes. I was like his pal, and I had forgotten all about it. So there you go. And Ron Howard, we all know where he went, what he's done. So that was funny. The same woman I did. Oh, another thing, I did 9 episodes of My Three Sons. That was probably my favorite run. I was always Ernie's best friend, and I would go do a couple episodes a year for them for about 4 years during our teenage 14 to 17 type of thing. So that was good.
Incredible. And you haven't stopped. I mean, you're still working in the industry. Talk a little bit about what it is that you are doing nowadays.
Well, I don't go on auditions. The reason I really stopped acting was I just got tired of the audition process. I thought, how much work do you have to do before you at least possibly get someone reaching out to you through a script or through a Zoom meeting or whatever, even though we didn't have a Zoom back then, something other than the cattle call situation. Not a true cattle call. I never really went on cattle calls, but you do so much work and you start wondering, like, for instance, the Smith family, Virginia Martindale was the casting director for My Three Sons. So to save herself having to cast anybody, she just called up Mary and says, "Is Butch available? And we'd like to have him come do the Smith family." Maybe that's why I forgot about it, because it came too easy. But that was what I was hoping that would happen. And the fact that I really wasn't a true actor when I turned 19, 20 and got the money out of the bank, the last thing I really wanted to do was go to work. I just wanted to go to the beach and surf and be a kid, which I did. But the deal is, I'm kind of got sidetracked on the whole. What was the question again?
No, I wanted to know what you're up to nowadays.
Oh, the Drive-In Owners Association. Because of my love of the road and Americana, when I was a kid, my grandmother that I lived with twice, she was an antiquer, and she had a big 59 pink Cadillac. She drove back and forth cross country, and I was always her co-pilot, and we would stop and see all the neat things while she was doing her antiquing. She made sure that I got to see all the good stuff, the national parks and the caverns and the meteor craters and anything that the country has to offer. Well, one of my favorite memories as a kid was going to the drive-in movies. There used to be 4,000 of them. They're down to 400 now, but there's only 150 that are active in this Drive-In Owners Association. So I took it upon myself to join the association and went to their convention here about a month and a half ago. And I presented them with an idea that I had to come into town, take my Munster cars, get a car show situation, plop it on their property, and show Munster Go Home on Monday, call it a Munster Monday, and help them generate some revenue on a night they're normally closed. And having done that, I did 2 last year. It worked out very well. So now I'm putting a tour together to do hopefully a Monday and a Wednesday with a double feature of the Addams Family, and we call it a Wednesday. with Butch Patrick, Eddie Munster and Wednesday. Or I have a filmmaker, an independent filmmaker who makes modern day horror movies and kind of occult Bigfoot movies and things that kids like today, and offer them a chance to dive in at the drive-in. If you ever thought about being in a movie, come out and meet Butch Patrick, Eddie Munster, and during the intermission between the two features, we're going to put you into your drive-in car and the windshield. Make sure you clean your windshield because we're going to have drone shots of everybody at the drive-in, and they're going to be used in the movie. And it's called the Summer Scream Series, where each movie theater we commit a murder, and there'll be 13 murders throughout the summer. And everybody in these drive-ins in these various cities get a chance to come out and see how movies are made and participate as an extra in their car.
How cool is that?
It really is cool. It's very fun. It's going to work out really well, and it combines all the things that I love: the road trip, cars, helping people get into movies, memories from years gone by, and generating money for almost all drive-in movies are owned by mom and pops, so to speak, old hippies or old veterans, and they're all mom and pop owned. So you work directly with the community to help the community as well, and the drive-in owners as well, and it's a win-win for everybody.
Butch Patrick, you are the coolest. I have always wanted to meet you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be able to have a conversation with you. Such a huge fan. Thank you so much for telling me a little bit about the behind the scenes of your incredible life.
Not a problem. And if you like what I'll do to edit into this, I'll send you some literature for the drive-in thing, and you can figure that way to share that with your viewers.
I would love to do that. And if you come to the Nashville area, please let me know because I would love to be a part of that.
Okay, we will do that. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Honestly,
love.
Such an honor. I appreciate you.
You betcha. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.